From Bitcoin, blockchain or distributed ledger technology to cryptocurrencies, tokens and initial coin offerings, it seems everyone involved has something to say, but can you really trust their advice? One man's had enough of weasel words and charlatans and is ready to give you impartial, independent analysis. With digestible blockchain bites, ICO analysis and need-to-know news on cryptocurrencies, author, speaker, transparency and clarity advocate, and award-winning software innovator, Barry James brings you Radio ICO.
Hello, it's Barry James again with the Blockchain Bites program on ICO Radio. And today I'm with, a really interesting project. Some people have heard me talk a lot about RegTech and how, blockchain is part of the answer when a lot of people think it's part of the problem. But Auditchain is really interesting, and I'm delighted to be with founder, I believe that's right, Jason Myers. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you for having me, Barry.
So, Jason, would you just tell us a little bit about your background, kind of what got you here, and then we'll move on to Auditchain and where that came from?
Sure. So I've been in the investment banking space for 30 years. I started my career in March of 1988. I guess that's over 30 years. And I, originated many private placements, initial public offerings, firm commitment, public offerings, secondary offerings, restructurings. And through that skill set, of course, you're exposed to the world of audit and accounting, financial reporting especially. And in the United States, we have a body of legislature that governs financial reporting. It's called the Securities Exchange Act of 1934.
Yeah.
Of course, in order to comply with the 34 Act, you first need to comply with the 33 Act, which is your initial issuance and accompanying set of disclosures. So I had a significant amount of experience in that area. And what brought me to this particular project was, I didn't wake up one day and say, I think I'll build a decentralized continuous audit and reporting protocol. The guys from Uber, if you know the story, were pissed off because they couldn't catch a cab in Paris. And the rest is history, right?
Yeah.
I had built an investment bank and raised capital for it in 2007, 2008 during the financial crisis, which was the best time to build an investment bank because people who were completely unavailable a year prior were all of a sudden not only available, but available at a reasonable price. Mm. And so we had Facebook as a customer because we got into a very specialized business, stock plan administration, which we were the first company to build a platform that was multi-jurisdictional, which allowed HR and finance to keep records of and administrate grants of equity compensation to its executives and employees. Mm-hmm. And it allowed those executives and employees to literally one-click exercise in a straight-through process all the way from grant to trade execution, clearance, settlement, and SEC reporting, all under one roof, under one architecture. And Facebook loved it. But Facebook was the largest private wealth opportunity in history. Mm. And they put out an RFP in 2011, end of 10, beginning of 11 sometime. Mm. We showed up and we responded. They told us they're not changing, but it's the audit committee's responsibility to put out an RFP for this stuff for, every 4 years. And To make a long story short, what came soon after were a flurry of informal, at the time, as it starts, informal inquiries from the U.S. securities industry regulator called FINRA, right?
Yeah.
Which is supervised by the SEC.
Yeah.
But it's not a government agency. And that led to a hostile exchange of interrogatories, document requests, and on-the-record interviews about how we use the proceeds of the private placement.
Right.
So I submitted an independent review accounting, which is similar to a quarterly review by an auditor of a public company, which accounted for all of the proceeds. And apparently that didn't work. So we did another separate 100% transaction population forensic accounting of the use of the proceeds, and realized that that wasn't working. And it was at that time that I knew that this was not really about accounting. It was about something else. Mm. And I was, they drained every penny I had. I was basically forced to sign the worst agreement I ever signed. So I gave up my license. My firm failed. And I was very angry for a while. And I holed myself up in my house for almost a year.
Yeah.
And it was at that time that I did more reading about blockchain. This was 2013-ish. I did more reading. I knew about blockchain. I knew about Bitcoin. Was very familiar. But I was busy, right?
Yeah.
And so,
can I just ask along the way, are you able to say what it really was about?
What was really?
You said it wasn't really about the data or the audit. It was about something else. Can you say?
Well, I'll tell you who showed up to respond to the RFP that Facebook put out. There were 6 major providers in the stock plan space. The premium providers are Smith Barney, UBS, and Merrill Lynch.
Okay.
I had recruited the head of Smith Barney's stock plan group as the head of our stock plan group. And then the cut rate providers were Schwab, Fidelity, and E-Trade. There were 3 more firms that showed up who responded that have nothing to do with stock plan service. And that was Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and I believe Jefferies.
Right. So if I were to conclude that the regulatory system, as we're talking about FINRA, who are an industry body fundamentally, has its problems or possibly even broken, you wouldn't necessarily disagree with that?
Well, I can't agree or disagree because I agreed not to disagree or agree with the statement.
I understand. Okay.
Right?
I'll draw my own conclusions then.
Anybody can draw their own conclusions. I just cannot draw them for you legally.
I understand that. So, but this is what got you going then. This is what got you started.
So what I took away from that is, how do you avoid regulatory conflict? How do you create the one single universal immutable truth that cannot be politicized? And if it is politicized, you can just hand over the key, they can turn it, and it is what it is, what it is. Plain and simple.
Got it.
So during the time of my studies, I really, really dove into the science behind blockchain, right? Yeah. I knew the cryptocurrency aspects were, there would be a speculative bubble that would develop, but I want to know the underlying science. How is this immutable? How can we store and transfer $1 billion without it being hacked, right? Because as you know, there are crowds of malicious actors that sit around and watch for this stuff.
Yeah, and the bigger the pot, the more and the better they are.
It's all a bounty in the end, really. Mm-hmm. So I had my aha moment, so to speak.
Yeah.
There are 2 types of people, I believe, that exist in blockchain. There are those that develop an understanding of the science over a period of time. Those I call the educational variety. And then there are those whose minds are predisposed to its understanding. And it's a rare breed of a combination of a person who understands technology, but who also understands monetary systems, monetary policy, economics, corporate finance, investment banking, and there are those that it hits them all at once.
Yeah.
And that was what I experienced. I was in the office of a friend of mine who he's a cult figure in the Bitcoin community in New York. And it just hit me. And the way it hit me was, it was sudden and profound. And I realized that this was it. It seemed to me that the best use case for a blockchain is accounting, audit, and financial reporting.
Okay.
Right? And I began to write a paper, Decentralized Continuous Audit and Reporting Protocol Ecosystem. The ecosystem came a little later because, as you know, the more you iterate something, the more you understand it, the more you talk about it, the more you understand it, the more feedback you get, the more tailor the delivery of your message, and therefore it sharpens your understanding. In a big way, it's you can't keep it unless you give it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really, good that you talk about that process, because not everyone understands that. But that's brought you to where you are now, both with the project, but also with the vision. So would you talk about the vision as you see it now, and what this is all about?
So the vision has evolved over the last 2 years. I have to tell you that I spoke to every auditor I ever hired, every accountant I ever met, everyone I can get who I can get, in contact with, told them what I had thought I had discovered and began to write. And they were all blown away, especially the SSAE practitioners and the IASE practitioners, the system and control guys, and organizational control guys, right? So, but I wasn't getting any pushback. And I got to tell you this. So there was an 800-pound gorilla I knew I had to get over, and that was Rutgers University. The continuous audit lab at Rutgers University has been at this for 25 years. And I knew I had to get over it. If I couldn't, before I spent any money on this, let me get through these guys. And I did. And they invited us to present at the 40th World Continuous Audit and Reporting Symposium, which is where I met Eric Coen. Eric Coen.
So would it be fair to say in those 20 years, they'd been, let me put it colloquially, banging on about this, but not getting a lot of...
Yes. Banging on is exactly the case. Mainly confined to internal audit, not external audit, but still, when you can nail your internal audit process on a continuous basis, external audit becomes a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
But you hit the nail right on the head, Barry. So I met Miklos and Michael, the two heads of the lab, and we presented last November. And he wasn't scheduled. I didn't even want to, it was 2 days. We went the first day. I wanted to get in, get off, and get out. Because, I'm not an accountant or an auditor. I'm not a scientist. I didn't go to school for it. And, but he wasn't scheduled to speak, but that's where Eric Coen was. I did go the second day. That's when he spoke. And I made a beeline for him after his presentation. And I asked him, did you see our presentation? Right? Because this guy invented XBRL. And I started using XBRL in 2010 to build a research platform using SEC data.
Just for those who aren't familiar with it, would you just say what it is?
XBRL, Extensible Business Reporting Language, is a standard language, markup language, a variant of XML. that most regulatory jurisdictions in the civilized world require companies that report to use it. HMRC requires it for all sorts of government filings. The SEC, since 2011, was the last phase of the rollout where any document you file, you've got to tag it with XBRL, and that's what XBRL is.
So the inventor of this, the author of this, is a demigod.
In that world, he's a celebrity. Yeah, everybody knows him, yeah. So I literally asked Eric on the spot if he would join us on this journey, and he did, and we've been inseparable ever since.
That's one of the things I was going to ask you about, and I want to come back to the vision in a moment or two. But it's certainly a big vision, and you've managed to attract some really amazing people. One of whom I've been told is rumored to be Satoshi Nakamoto, but I'm not going to ask you about that. But certainly one of the co-inventors of blockchain.
So I met Stuart, not through Eric, but through another colleague, Charles Wang, and Jonathan Mohan, both of whom are heavily involved in the New York City blockchain community. And he said that there's this gentleman, he's a scientist, he's a little older than us. He's, I'm not going to say, but his name is cited 3 out of the 8 times in the original Satoshi white paper. And I did my homework, and sure enough, it was one of the papers that I read when I was holed up in my home, which is How to Timestamp a Digital Document, released in, I believe, 1991 by Scott Stornetta and Stuart Haber.
Yeah.
So I met Stuart, and he's a mild-mannered cryptographer. He's a very low-key personality. He shies away from publicity, usually very unassuming. We tease him. We call him Satoshi. He denies it, and so does Scott. But these 2 guys invented the data structure we all now know as blockchain. In fact, they built the world's first commercial blockchain called Surety, which is still operational to this day.
And it's in the New York Times every week, I gather.
It is, yes. And that wasn't known until the last 3 or 4 months. He told me the story when we first met, and he always brings his New York Times everywhere he goes because he gets it delivered every Sunday. And they've been publishing the previous week's blocks of that blockchain in the classified section of the New York Times every Sunday since 1994.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. The public may believe, or if you look at the tenets of game theory, who can be right in front of your face yet be the most mysterious figure in a specific community, right? It's usually the guy right in front of your face. It's always the most assuming, unsuspected person, right? Is it Craig Wright? Not likely that someone that says, I'm Satoshi, is Satoshi. Not likely, right? Besides, he's got another chain he's busy forking. We all know that's Bitcoin Cash, so he's got to shill as much as he can. But some say it's Hal Finney. Some say it's a group of people. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. Who knows?
But
we'll never know. I don't know.
But what is for certain is you've assembled what can only be called a stellar team. Somehow or other, that everyone else I think would be it's kind of to die for around this vision. So you've started to talk about the vision. Let's go back to that. What does it promise? What's it for?
So, look, we've compiled, and there's been many compilations of substantial damaging error and or fraud, right? One of the most publicized in London, as you know, is the collapse of Carillion. And there's a witch hunt, and the target are the big 4, right? So regulators in London are looking at how do we deal with this? and it can only come from some wacko out of left field, right? And that's me. And in fact, a lot of the times I sit around the table, I go, guys, why did it have to be? Why does it have to be me? Why am I cursed with this?
Mm-hmm.
And the vision is it's not simple, but it's simple. The vision is, let's crowdsource enterprise data set validation, much in the same way that when I put up a Bitcoin transaction, I send it to you. An army of external validators confirm that transaction. It becomes part of the integrity of the chain, right? And it's immutable, right? It's confirmed, it's validated, right? It is the one single universal immutable truth, right?
Yeah, it's kind of rolling transparency as well, isn't it?
That's correct. That's correct. Now, the one thing that people will begin to realize, if they don't already, is that any blockchain project that conducts a token-based fundraising campaign, by default, is transparent to an extent. The transparency has to do with the fact that they can see 20 million in value going from their smart contract to an array of wallets, right? But then thereafter, they see from those wallets payments going to everywhere else, right? So there's no context to it. Now, in this country, in the United States, if you make a partial disclosure without critical information that should accompanying it, which makes the disclosures made misleading or untrue, that is an administrative violation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by providing a transparent, cryptographically supported audit trail that backs up the context of all of those transactions in the form of a GAAP in the United States compliant series of financial statements, P&L, cash flow, balance, and statement of changes in stockholders' equity, if any, right? Then you will have added context and are complying within the spirit of what's prescribed in, one, the 33 Act, but more so in the 34 Act. And so, because if you're selling something that eventually will flicker on a ticker, as I like to say, you're a security. If you flicker on a ticker in the United States, you are a security. There's no way around it. It doesn't matter what kind of utility, the depth of utility. If you are creating an opportunity for anyone to cause speculation or to speculate, you're a security.
Yeah.
That's it. And that being the case, you've got laws you have to comply with. And Jay Clayton is right when he shakes his finger, right?
Yeah.
It's just that everybody's
I think it's fair to say not everyone agrees, not least those our friends over in Zug in Switzerland who identify other kinds of tokens. But the vision here, though, is that radical transparency on a rolling basis. So moving from a snapshot to a kind of video. And
that's correct.
Yeah. So
that's
actually,
just because Zug in Switzerland says there's different types of classifications, look, at the end of the day, what are they doing? What is the percentage of people that are buying it to actually use and burn as a utility on a network for services that they consume? A very small percentage. That's not going to happen until the network is delivered, which is after the ICO, right? So in this country, in the United States, just be a security until you're not.
Okay.
Right? And
we're going to run out of time in a few moments, and there's one particular question I want to ask you before we kind of get into a few details about Auditchain and the ICO there. So I was invited for lunch one time at the Bank of England with one of the senior researchers there. And he explained to me that part of the vision internally within the research department there is, remember we used to see the power stations with screens everywhere, all monitoring what the different generators were doing and consumption and all of this.
Sure.
That for the economy. And does that relate? Is that what we're talking about?
It relates, but the question is at the Bank of England level or at the Federal Reserve level or any central bank level, to what extent is that data validated, audited, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, there is no extent that there is a consensus-based audit or validation, which is the vision we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of hiring a single auditor that you pay, for instance, Bank of America may pay anywhere between $50 and $100 million to a team of 100 auditors that gang up every year to conduct a wet ink engagement audit procedure, right?
Yeah.
If you pay $150 million, maybe they'll conduct it in such a way that, I don't know, humans are frail. Humans can be influenced. They can be incentivized. They can be dissuaded, right? Human nature is human nature.
Yeah.
But the code of a consensus on a blockchain is not influenced. It's baked into the protocol, right? So if you're willing to submit to this kind of environment, right away you have a degree of credibility. Anyone that shies away from submitting to this protocol is likely looking to preserve some sort of opportunity for conditionalization or subjectification. You can call it whatever you want, right?
So, just coming back to the thing I said right at the top, is this part of the solution in terms of reg tech, in terms of regulation going forward? What part is this of the solution, would you say?
Well, it's disclosure, it's transparency, it's governance. Governance is key. The chair of your audit committee, which is required by most larger exchanges in the case of trading equities and listing equities, is supposed to be the most independent director on the board of directors.
Yeah.
We see that as Auditchain's vision of transforming that into a digital protocol that can't be influenced or controlled or swayed in any way. So
that cuts through a whole swathe of potential problems and changes the landscape then, does it?
It does. And the other thing it does is that it really makes it raises significant amounts of efficiencies in the assurance world, right? Yeah. It changes the job and the role of an auditor. And we believe that it's coming anyway. The Big Four know it's coming. They're all working on something. The problem is independence, right? So it's not like they can effectively create something similar because their independence is on the line, right? Yeah. And there's nothing more independent than a consensus-based enterprise data set validation on a continuous basis, right? Not everybody's going to give reasonable assurance. There will some that will give notary assurance, which means we've seen it, but we're not providing any opinions on it. Or there may be some that believe there's an adverse condition present in that data set. But all in all, when you score it, say from 1 to 100, and your average score is a 70, 75, 80, right? You've got reasonable assurance that those financial statements are presenting fairly in all material respects the financial condition of the company. On top of that, the separate system and control audit, right, which makes a financial statement audit almost an afterthought, is really where the meat and potatoes lies with us, right? So we certify your initial implementation of what we call your enterprise state machine, your suite of applications that governs your enterprise, that governs the accounting, your accounting systems, HR, supply chain, and every other application that's used to run your enterprise. So they have originally specified operational objectives, which get certified. And then the continuous audit is an attestation of whether or not it's deviated away from those originally specified certified operational objectives, right? And if they do, there's a much, much higher likelihood that the data coming out of them is one, accurate, and two, compliant with GAAP and or IFRS, right?
Right.
So you've got your consensus-based external validation of both system and control and financial statement, right?
Great. Okay. We're almost out of time, so I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to talk a little bit about the token offering, which is coming up. Would you tell us a bit about that, and who's it for, who's going to be interested in that, and who qualifies to participate?
So it's a free-floating token in terms of price. It will trade on exchanges, right? Which means that there will be volatility. That being the case, the cheapest that someone can adopt the network is at the time of the ICO. So we're selling, out of 250 million tokens, we're selling 160 million of them, right? There's 25.8 for the team, 25.8 for advisors, and 25.8 for partnerships, critical service providers on the network. And then there's 12.5 million for bounty, right? Now, out of the 160, there is 42 million that we will airdrop after the ICO to those that we proved didn't move so much as a speck of dust. Proof of HODL is really what is this. We designed a proof of HODL airdrop, which is designed to punish flippers and reward long-term holders, i.e. users, who are likely to use the token on the network when we deliver the network.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is this a game just for corporates or for high net worths? What's the the floor limit in terms of the minimum contribution?
Well, the minimum contribution on the ICO itself, I believe, is 1/10 of an ETH equivalent. There'll be a maximum contribution of $1 million on the ICO.
Yeah.
We are conducting a private pre-sale now of 6.25 million audit in exchange for 2,500 ETH, which works out to 2,500 audit per ETH. On our website is a disclosure regarding the stages of the ICO itself, which I believe starts at, it ends at 1,500 and starts at around 1,900 or so. And I should have my facts in front of me, right?
But that's great. It gives us the general picture. So no one's really excluded from this. And this is something that myself in the UK or someone in the US can get involved in.
Unfortunately, it is closed to US purchasers. And I'll give you the reason. It's easy to comply with securities laws, but FinCEN wants you to become a member.
Okay.
And only big institutions become members of FinCEN because you got to file SARS reports every day and you need a compliance department. It gets very expensive. Right?
I get it. And I think there's a lot of us out here who understand, and this is my opinion, I'm not imputing it to you, but there's some cleanup to be done. And the world could be more open, and guess what? That's why a lot of us are here. So thank you, Jason, for your work on this. I'll be watching this with avid interest. If people want to get involved, if they come to ICO Radio and put Auditchain in there, we'll redirect them from there, or they can come direct via auditchain.com.
Yes, I do want to say something about an affiliate entity that it's called the DCARP Alliance. And if you visit www.dcarpe.org, dcarp.org, join the alliance, especially if you're a CPA or a chartered accountant.
Yeah.
That's where the community develops as far as the enterprise community, regulatory community, and the accounting and audit community, because it's a coalition of members of the accounting, audit, financial reporting, regulatory, legal, and enterprise community, all working together to, over a period of time, fine-tune our protocol, decentralized continuous audit and reporting protocol ecosystem.
And can anyone join that?
Not anyone. We prefer that, if you're an academic in accounting, audit, financial reporting, definitely join. Corporate finance, business, right? Definitely join. Any academic institution can join. If you're an accounting firm, you should join. If you're an auditor, you should join. A CPA, a chartered accountant, any software company that publishes software for enterprises should join. If you're a regulator, you should join. If you're a lawyer that does corporate finance, financial reporting, you should join. Insurance companies that work in the area of assurance should join, right? That's the type of community that should join.
Well, it sounds like a whole different interview that we should have at some point to talk about, is it Decarb?
Decarb Alliance.
Decarb Alliance.
That's correct.
I should be looking into that because that's an area of intense interest for me. But for now, Jason,
ICO rating agency should join also. If you're if you are an ICO rating agency, right, the existence of Auditchain will take your rating system and change it. So those who are a 5 or the top rating, without Auditchain, will come down. With Auditchain, we'll go back up to your highest rating, right? Everybody wants immutable transparency, the one single universal immutable truth.
Well, right? I'll be looking into that, and I'm sure we'll be talking again before too long. Jason Myers, thank you so much.
Thank you, Barry, for having me.
You're welcome.
ICO Radio was brought to you by author, speaker, transparency and clarity advocate, and award-winning software innovator Barry James. Get in touch with the programme, put yourself or someone else forward as a guest. Visit iconewsdesk.com. And if you've enjoyed the show, please leave a review. And don't forget to subscribe to get your next insights and interviews from the ICO Radio podcast.